Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soybean Innovation Lab webinar, Soybean Disease in the Tropics, a Management Toolkit. My name is Amy Karyanikis. I am the Communications Manager for the Soybean Innovation Lab and will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Soybean Innovation Lab, a USAID Feed the Future initiative focused on improving soybean production and utilization in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, we are joined by registrants from 45 different countries, representing organizations within the private sector, academia, development agencies, and research institutions. Many of us during this difficult time are practicing social distance and remain inside our homes to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We're glad you have decided to spend some of that time at home with us. So big welcome to everyone here. Before we begin, I would like to give everyone a quick overview of the GoToWebinar software, which you can use to engage with panelists, ask questions, and access webinar resources. Whether you're using the desktop or web application, you'll see a questions pane on your control panel. Please type in your questions as they arise, along with your organization and country. We will collect all of your questions and address as many as possible during the question and answer session at the end. Questions that are not answered during the webinar will receive a written response after the webinar is concluded. On your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll also see a handouts pane. Expand this pane to access today's presentation materials and the webinar presentation in its entirety. Depending on your connectivity, you may experience a lag in the transition of the slides during the presentations. This presentation is available as a PDF in your handouts pane, so feel free to access it there and follow along at your own pace. I'd like to give a quick introduction of today's panelists before beginning the webinar. First off, we have Dr. Glen Hartman joining us. Glen is a plant pathologist and professor with USDA Agricultural Research Services at the University of Illinois. He will be providing us with an overview of the current state of soybean disease in Africa. Glen will also be moderating our Q&A following all of today's presentations. So please remember to ask your questions in the question pane, and please include your organization and country.
Good day to everyone.
Thanks, Glen. We also have the privilege of Dr. Harun Murithi joining us today from Kenya. Harun is a plant pathologist for USDA Agricultural Research Services, and he'll be discussing how to identify soybean disease in sub-Saharan Africa. Thanks for being here today, Harun.
Hi, everyone, and welcome.
Next, I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Michelle Pawlowski. Michelle is a postdoctoral researcher with USDA here at the University of Illinois, and she will be discussing soybean seed pathology. Nice to have you with us today, Michelle.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
We are also very excited to have Dr. Lorna Migiro, the Plantwise Program Support Manager with CABI in Kenya. Lorna will give a brief overview of Plantwise and what the organization's role is in pest management. Thanks, Lorna.
Hi, everyone. You're welcome.
And last, I'd like to introduce Nicole Lee. Nicole is the extension lead here at the Soybean Innovation Lab and also the developer of SIL's free online course in integrated pest management and pesticide safety. Nikki will be giving an overview of the course, letting our audience know how they can register, and hopefully, if we have time, a brief demo. Thanks, Nikki.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here.
So to get started with today's webinar, we'd like to launch our first interactive poll. We use these polls as a way to get your feedback and to get an understanding of the range of attendees here with us today. So for our first poll, we'd like to know who's joining us today. Please select all the answers that apply, as more than one of these may describe you. We'll give everyone a few moments to record their answer. Okay, and we'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. So it looks like most of you work for a nonprofit. Share the results there. So thanks everyone for your feedback. This is good to know. It's always nice to get a little background on the attendees joining us for each webinar, so thank you. So now I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Glen Hartman to give us a brief overview of the current state of soybean disease and pests across sub-Saharan Africa. Glen, feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Welcome to the webinar on soybean diseases in the tropics, a management toolkit. Today we have an exciting event with great speakers and lots of information. As Amy said, my name is Glen. I'm with the USDA Agricultural Research Service and the Department of Crop Sciences located at the University of Illinois. I'm going to start the kickoff presentation and provide some background on diseases and pests of soybeans and their management. Next slide, please. The top graph shows soybean production in hectares from 1961, when there was about 200,000 hectares in production, to 2018, when there was 2.5 million hectares in production. This total represents about 1% of the hectares in production worldwide. In general, there has been a rapid increase in production in the last decade, and if the trend continues, this will double the area in production within the next decade. And these are just production areas in Africa, and again, yield kilogram per hectare from Africa. This is from FAO statistics. And although there has been a general increase in production, yields lag behind by about a third compared to many countries outside of Africa. The good news is the trend is going up, and in summary, to keep up with the growing population, the potential to grow more soybeans in Africa is great and will be enhanced with good management practices and inputs like the ones we are providing through this webinar today, and those provided by USAID Soybean Innovation Lab. Next slide, please. Just a bit of history. Soybeans were introduced into the African continent about 100 years ago. It was noted then that soybeans had diseases described as black mildew, blight, and rust. To this day, we don't know exactly which diseases these describe. In any case, we've noted in the last years visiting a number of African countries that soybean diseases in Africa do not differ from ones reported elsewhere, with maybe a few exceptions. One of the exceptions is a disease we call red leaf blotch, pictured to the right of your screen. The images on the top are from early development of the disease, and the pictures on the bottom is as the disease develops and matures. The disease was first reported in 1957, and as far as we know today, it only occurs in sub-Saharan African countries. Because we have limited knowledge about the management of red leaf blotch, other than it appears that there is generally lack of resistance in soybean varieties developed in the United States. This disease is considered a major threat to production in countries outside of Africa, as well as countries within Africa. Along with red leaf blotch, we found other diseases of importance in Africa, including frog-eye leaf spot, soybean rust, sudden death syndrome, and a few others, including some seed diseases. In summary, diseases may be major or minor depending on their distribution, whether they're local or whether they're pandemic in nature and the degree of their severity. Next slide, please. Based on our research visits to the Pan-African trials, like the one in Jimma, Ethiopia to the right, we have found a number of diseases that are unknown in distribution and importance in Africa. So we don't know if a disease we find in Ghana, for example, this Myrothecium leaf spot, and others listed are important in other countries as well. So through these Pan-African trials, we are learning more about what diseases occur in a range of geographic areas and environments. We know that the disease distribution changes over time and space, and some of the diseases change more than others. For example, soybean rust is one of the most explosive soybean diseases because it produces super abundant number of spores that are airborne. But these spores depend on air currents and other factors, and sometimes it can be the #1 disease in one season at one particular location, and then the next season it's not found at all. The goal for us really is to develop a centralized reporting system where updates on outbreaks of diseases and pests on soybeans in Africa can be monitored. This is important for management practices as we need to know which diseases and or pests are the problem so we can address best management practices to mitigate the issue. Next slide, please. This slide shows a view of the disease triangle. Oh, we must have missed one here. Yeah, okay, there we go. This slide shows a picture of the disease triangle. This disease triangle is made up of a host, in this case soybean, the pathogen, which in the image shows soybean rust spores, and the ever-changing environment. Without one of these three, diseases will not develop. If you don't have a conducive environment, you don't have disease. Of course, including the age of the host, the susceptibility of soybeans. Not all soybean varieties are susceptible to all pathogens, for example. And other variabilities include the strain of the pathogen. Not all rust isolates actually are the same. Some have virulence genes that overcome resistant genes in soybeans and others do not. And there is the environment. Some pathogens like it warm and moist, while others like it cool and moist, and even others like drier conditions to be conducive for development. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide just shows the pathogens that we're dealing with. There's different classes, including bacteria, fungi, nematodes, oomycetes, parasitic plants, phytoplasmas, and viruses. By far, the most important diseases are the ones that are caused by fungi, but I've listed an important disease behind each of these different classes. For example, bacteria would be bacterial pustule. The 7 represents actually the number of diseases caused by bacteria. So again, fungi have the greatest number. There's 35 different diseases caused by fungi. And the images on the right are just some of the research ways we develop research in terms of looking at these different diseases. It involves field work. It involves culturing the pathogen. Sometimes it involves sequencing the pathogen, the DNA or RNA of the pathogens to determine really what they are. It also involves inoculating plants. Lots of times we get isolates that we have to put back on plants to show that they cause disease. So these are very important types of activities that we do. And I think that this is just a representation of some of the research work that we do. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're on this. Okay, so this is the part about looking for disease in the field. We often focus our efforts looking at foliar diseases. That would be the bottom left, that's Septoria brown spot. But really, the pathogens can infect roots, stems, leaves, pods, and seeds. Some pathogens are what we call generalist, where they can infect almost all different plant parts of the soybean plant, but others are actually very specific and may only infect roots, or for example, may only infect seeds. So it's important that we consider the whole plant when we take a disease picture or a disease slice of what we're looking for in the plant. Next slide, please. One of our first tasks was to determine what diseases occur in Africa, and based on our observation and assistance of people like you, we were able to develop this field guide to diseases and pests. This is version 1.1 that I'm showing here, and we are working on version 2. If you have any good images that you think might be inclusive in a new field guide like this, that would be great, along with the newer pictures and more updates on insect pests. We would like to include a section on management in the new guide as well. This guide has been now translated, I believe, in 4 or 5 different languages. So it's been very popular, and you can download it from the website that's given there. Next slide, please. And one of our, I guess, our end products really that we do in our research is develop publications and also training sessions. I mentioned the field guide to diseases first here, but we also have many first reports, and first reports indicate that this was the first time a disease was reported, and usually it's a country or sometimes even a continent. And the reports that we have so far are rust in Ethiopia, this myrothecium leaf spot in Africa, and actually this is in Ghana. And then we have first report of bacterial tan spot that we found to be much more widespread than we first predicted. And then the first report of sclerotinia in Ethiopia. And we also have another first report coming of Sclerotinia stem rot in Kenya too that we're working on. One of the bigger publications was this evaluation of the foliar diseases in the Pan-African trials. This was data that was taken last year, March, in Malawi and Zambia, and that just came out last month. And we also have a new record of a cotton aphid, and the reason I was interested in aphids, partly because one of our major pests in the US is the soybean aphid, and we thought maybe we had the soybean aphid in Zambia, but it turned out to be actually Aphis scassipii, which is the cotton aphid. It still could be a problem on soybean. Typically here in the US, this aphid does not colonize soybeans. We've also been widely putting out our knowledge into training sessions. We did our first workshop in Tamale, Ghana in 2016, and we've done several other trainings, mostly field training on disease diagnosis in Malawi and Zambia, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Kenya. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I think you're going to enjoy the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. That was a great overview. I encourage everyone to check out the field guide that Glenn mentioned. I'm actually going to go back a slide here. I just wanted to point out that we do have, we provided links to the guide in English, French, Portuguese, Amharic, and Swahili. You can access a PDF of the presentation in your handouts pane, and that includes all of these links. Okay. So before we continue, I'd just like to remind everyone to please type in your questions into the question pane of your GoToWebinar control panel and include your organization and country. We'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end of our webinar. As another reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be sent to you after the webinar concludes. So now I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Harun Murithi. Harun is going to discuss how to identify soybean disease in the field, as well as touch on a few particular diseases that are prevalent across sub-Saharan Africa. Harun, you can begin whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Emmy. As introduced, my name is Harun Murithi. I'm a plant pathologist, and currently I'm doing a postdoc with the USDA-ARS, and I'm based in Nairobi, where I backstop on Pan-African, the Pan-African variety trials, as well as do some research on red leaf blotch. And today I would like to highlight some of the diseases that we've been able to identify in sub-Saharan Africa in the Pan-African variety trials. Next slide, please. And so the Pan-African variety trials, we have about a total of 70 currently in 16 countries. And these Pan-African trials gives us an opportunity to get information, including the occurrence of different diseases and pests. And, you know, soybean diseases resemble quite a lot, and it might be difficult for practitioners to identify them in the field. And so we know that correct diagnosis is important for proper management. And for this webinar, we did surveys in 17 sites across 6 countries. That is in Uganda, Zambia, Kenya, Malawi, Ethiopia, and Ghana. And we identified that diseases and pests differ between sites and among countries. Next slide, please. So when we look at the frequency of the soybean in the Pan-African variety trials, we wanted to see how many diseases, how the number of times a disease is found in each of the sites. And out of the 17 sites, we see that one of the diseases, Cercospora leaf spot, was identified or was observed in more than in about 15 sites out of the 17, followed by mustard leaf spot. And other diseases like brown spot was identified or was observed in only like 2 countries. So this one shows us that diseases and pests are occurring. I mean, they're occurring in different sites, and this could be due to the environmental factors that are prevailing in each of the different sites. Next slide, please. So when you look at the severity of the diseases, we also recognize that the severity of these diseases differ. And in this map, we present 4 different diseases that are represented by the
Harun, I'm sorry to interrupt. It appears your sound went out for a moment.
Hi, Amy. I'm not getting any sound either from Harun.
Okay, I think he might not be able to hear us either.
The genotypes. Next slide, please. So we want want to highlight some of the important diseases that we saw in the Pan-African variety trials, and we want to start with soybean rust, which is one of the most important diseases, especially in Africa and also in Southern America. This disease causes up to 80% yield loss because it affects photosynthesis by the yellowing of the leaves, as you can see in that picture. It occurs in more than 10 countries in Africa, and also we do not have any commercial varieties that are resistant that are available right now. And so when we looked at the genotypes in the Pan-African variety trials in Kenya, Malawi, and Uganda, we see that the severity is the severity was quite high. Majority of these genotypes or the entries in the Pan-African variety trials are above 2, a score of 2. And in this case, this is based on a 0 to 5 scale, where 0 is no visible symptoms and 5 is 100%, 91 to 100% of the canopy. And so what we see is that there could be only a few number of genotypes that are resistant to this disease. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, we have red leaf blotch. This disease is specific to Africa. It is native to Africa. Was discovered in 1957 in Ethiopia, and so far is found in more than 11 countries. And we also do not have any resistant varieties that are available for this disease. And when we compare, the disease was observed in at least 4 in at least 4 countries, and we see that the highest severity was recorded in Ethiopia, followed by Malawi and Malawi, Uganda, and also in Kenya. This disease, we are still doing some screening so that we can identify any sources of resistance that could be used in the breeding programs. Next slide, please. So next is frog eye leaf spot. This is another important disease that has been recorded elsewhere in the world, and also we found it in Africa. It causes the yield loss of up to 30% and affects germination of soybean, the seed germination, because it's seed borne. And when in this case, we compared about 20 entries of soybean in the Pan-African variety trials that were common both in Ethiopia and Zambia. And we noticed that the severity of these genotypes was quite high, going all the way up to 4.5 a score. But also we identify some of the, we observed that some of the entries were quite resistant, like, they had low disease severity, like Saga and Serenine, and probably this could be a good candidates for sources of resistance. Then further studies are required for that purpose. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned by Glen, we identify some of the emerging soybean diseases because soybean is a new crop in some of the countries. And therefore, what we notice is that some of the diseases include like mustard leaf spot, which is a disease that has not known etiology. We do not know what causes this disease, as well as we don't know the kind of yield loss.
I think we lost his audio again, Amy.
Harun, can you hear us? We lost your audio for a moment. Harun, can you hear us? I think the video may have frozen as well. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to move on. I know he was at the end of his presentation, so I apologize, Harun, if you can hear us, but it seems the audio and video is cut out, so we're going to move on here. And we're going to go ahead and launch our second poll. So that poll is, what is the biggest challenge or constraint you see when it comes to managing soybean disease and pests? We'll give everyone a few moments to record their answer. Okay, and we'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we'll go ahead and share those results. It looks like most of you identified the inability to identify the disease or pest. So thank you for your feedback. We're going to go ahead and move forward. I'd like to now turn it over to Dr. Michelle Pawlowski. Michelle is going to discuss soybean seed pathology. Michelle, please begin your presentation whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Like Amy said, I'm Michelle. I'm going to be talking about how we've been working with the Soybean Innovation Lab to do soybean seed pathology. So next slide. The first thing I want to touch on is kind of what that is. So seed-borne pests and pathogens are infect the seed, or will lay eggs in the seed, or eat away at the seed. Especially with those pathogens, that seed is now a carrier for that pathogen. So there's a few reasons why it's important to do these evaluations. First off is when you're planting for the next season, if you're using that seed, you're now inoculating your field with that pathogen. So that could cause early season mortality. Either the seed won't germinate or the seedling will be overcome by that pathogen. So that's going to impact yields for the next year. There's also the risk of transmitting these diseases to new areas. So if you were to have a field that had no problem with bacterial pan spot, which is a seed transmitted disease, and then you planted seed that had that bacteria infecting it, you now introduce that disease pressure to that field. There's also a reason to do it for human safety. So all these pathogens and pests are degrading and eating away at the seed, as well as some of them are producing toxins that are harmful to humans, so it would make them unfit for consumption. All right, next slide, please. So just showing an overview with this slide of the seed I've gotten and the seed I've been able to evaluate thus far, which is a really nice range around sub-Saharan Africa. So I've been able to go through 6 countries with 32 locations and doing these evaluations, trying to find out what diseases are prevalent in which areas, as well as looking to see if there's any genotypes that perform better against these seed-borne diseases in these areas. Next slide, please. So with all this information, what we're interested in doing is creating the Soybean Seed Pathology and Pest Guide. So this is a guide that's going to be full of training materials for researchers and seed technologists, or anybody who is interested in implementing their own seed health programs. Next slide, please. So this training guide is going to encompass a lot of different protocols, going through the same stuff that I've been doing in my lab, or our lab, and looking at seed health ratings, how to get the seed plated, and a good majority of this book is going to be dedicated to identification of any microbes that are growing out of these seed. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the seed health rating scale. So this is a way to effectively screen or rate a large amount of seed. If you have breeding trial going on to get a good overall health screen of your seed. So this is the same kind of rating scale as Harun was talking about, and you'll see in a lot of the extension reports where it's the 0 to 5 scale. So if there's a score of 0, all of your seed is going to look healthy. It's going to look very clean, no discoloration. And if you're to rate a 5, 90 to 100% of that seed is going to either be misshapen or discolored or looking diseased in some way. Next slide, please. So I use this rating scale to evaluate the seed that I was given. And so this is just a general overview of what I found by country. So you can see we did see everything from 0s to 5s, but overall we did see pretty low ratings, which is good. So that's just showing an overview, and they are different country by country as well, and different locations in these countries as well. Next slide, please. So after that, we go and we'll plate out the seed to see any kind of microbial growth growing out to actually know what is infecting the seed. So we're going to show a step-by-step guide how to surface disinfect and how to plate these seeds and what it's going to look like while you're going through this process, as well as different methods. So anybody with any type of resources are able to complete these. Next slide, please. So this is just showing kind of what you would be seeing if you were to do these seed plating evaluations. So everything from day 0, when you're just putting the seed onto the plate, you're going to start seeing germination and fungal growth around day 2. Then up to day 6, you can see that plate is pretty covered with a lot of different microbes on day, and that's the day that you'll usually be reading these plates. Next slide, please. So along with those protocols, again, most of that book is going to be dedicated to identification. So I'm going to go through a few important diseases that we have been seeing. So the first one is purple seed stain. And this is a pretty apparent disease, as you can see in the top right corner of the slide, that purple discoloration on the seed is very obvious symptom of purple seed stain. The reason we care about this is because it reduces seed quality and viability. This is caused by several fungi in the Cercospora genus. And like Glen was talking about before, some diseases affect multiple parts of the soybean. So there are a lot of the fungi that are causing the purple seed stain could also be associated with causing Cercospora leaf and stem blight. So this is an important one to watch out for. Next slide, please. I've also been seeing a lot of storage molds. So that includes Alternaria and Aspergillus species. So these can infect in the field and storage or transport. And they're mostly thriving in storage and transport conditions if they're unideal. So if you have storage conditions that are a little bit too humid or a little too warm, you're going to see an increase in these storage molds when you do your platings. We hear about these because they reduce seed quality and viability again, but also some of these produce those toxins I was talking about before. So the green fungus you see on the screen, Aspergillus flavus, that causes a toxin called aflatoxin, and that's carcinogenic to humans and animals. And that would make the seed unfit for consumption. All right, next slide, please. So along with all pathogen identification, there are a few pests that you need to worry about with seed. One of those pests is the bruchid or weevil. So there's 2 species in Africa that will infect soybean seeds, the cowpea bruchid and the Chinese bruchid. So both of these, you see those little flecks of white on those seed surfaces, those are eggs. So those eggs are going to hatch and the larvae are going to infiltrate the seed and they're going to eat away at that embryo. So that seed's no longer viable. And then you see that circle in the seed on the bottom left, that is how the bruchid escapes the seed. And if conditions are conducive for it, it's going to keep having multiple generations in storage, which can lead up to 100% damage. If there is evidence of infestation, even if it hasn't damaged all of your seed, this seed is unfit for distribution and consumption. All right, next slide, please. So this is just an overview of what I've been seeing when I've been doing the seed plating. Again, just by country, even though these locations have differed. So these are all percentages. So germination, aspergillus is those storage molds. Bacteria, we can't morphologically identify down to genus, but that would be bacterial tan spot, bacterial pustule, and bacterial blight are important pathogens in soybean. Cercospora is that purple seed stain. Frog eyes, also caused by a Cercospora species. Diaporthi have seed decay or stem canker, and then Fusarium is the Fusarium root complex. So rot away the roots of your plant, reducing yields. And you can see all these different countries do seem to have a problem with bacteria, but they do differ in their prevalence of these different diseases. Like Zambia has the highest amount of Fusarium that I was finding. All right, next slide, please. All right, so just an overview of the resources that we're going to be producing out of this work. So we want to get that training guide out and available in July 2020. So that will be full of protocols and identification aids, as well as Harun was, I think his audio was lost at this point, but we're going to make these hotspot maps so you can see what diseases and at what severity for him that they're most prevalent in which locations. We're going to adapt that same concept to a seed-borne disease hotspot map and have that available as well. As well as that, continue to do these evaluations with more seed from different locations to gain more information and get that information out to you guys, such as the extension reports, which are a handout for this webinar. There is one from Zimbabwe on seed-borne diseases. And that is it for me, so thank you, and I'll hand it back to Amy.
Thanks, Michelle. Excited for that training guide you mentioned. We'll be sure to share that in our weekly newsletter when it's ready. We're getting a lot of great questions so far, so please keep them coming. And again, please include your organization and country. We'll have one more poll before we get into the Q&A session of the webinar, but right now I'd like to turn it over to our fourth panelist, Dr. Lorna Migiro. Lorna is going to tell us about Plantwise, a CABI-led program, and its role in pest management. Lorna, please feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. So my name is Lorna, and I work for an organization called CABI and under a program called Plantwise as the Program Support Manager. Next slide, please. So I want to introduce you to what Plantwise is. Generally, Plantwise is a global program that is led by CABI. It's just one of the programs within CABI. And the main aim of the program is to increase food security and to improve rural livelihoods by reducing crop losses. So in summary, the program the vision of the program is essentially to lose less and to feed more. Next slide, please. So this program was officially launched in countries in 2011. That is what I'm trying to illustrate from that table. But before then, there were trials, pilots, which can be dated to 2009. And so far, it has been introduced in 34 countries. These are the countries where the introductions have been done with varying degrees of success. And currently, we are active out of the 34, we are active in 29, 10 in Asia, 9 in Africa, and 12 in the Americas. So the program deals with all problems in all crops. And I know that is difficult for many of us to imagine, but yes, we deal with all problems in all crops, and we have for anything that we cannot, or the teams that we work with cannot be able to answer, we have a referral system where some of those problems can be solved. Next slide, please. So the program also works in terms of strengthening linkages among all stakeholders who are working in plant health systems. And as we know, when the stakeholders are linked together, then they are better able to bring their efforts together to be able to serve the farmers better. So there are various stakeholders that are linked within with this program, which includes national, local organizations, extension services, diagnostic services, research, NGOs, universities, and there are so many other, all the other stakeholders within the plant health systems. So the Plantwise concept is anchored on 3 program components, and the first one is what we call the plant health systems development, or the PHSD. And then we have the knowledge bank, which essentially supports what happens at the plant clinics, which is which lie under PhD. And then we have the monitoring and evaluation component, which essentially helps us to learn lessons, as well as to be able to know whether we are creating impact, whether what we set out to do, we are achieving whatever we had set out to do. Next slide, please. So underpinning the program, we have capacity building components also. And one of them is in terms of training. And we train advisory service providers, who in many countries are referred to as extension officers, in 2 modules. And the first module is what we call how to become a plant doctor. So once, and under this module, we train the advisory service providers in terms of how do you make a good diagnosis, how do you operate a plant clinic, and then they also undergo a second training module, which is essentially on plant health care, in terms of how do you manage plant health problems, how do you make a good recommendation to a farmer, depending on the problem that comes to the plant clinic. So essentially, next slide, please. Yeah, so plant clinics are a simple structure, if I can just explain. It's a simple structure, simple as being under a tree, but essentially it is an umbrella, and under the umbrella, we station 2 advisory service providers whom we have trained in the 2 modules that I've talked about, module 1 and 2, and then 2 of them are stationed under this simple structure where you have an umbrella and then maybe 2 seats where the plant doctors can sit, and they're equipped with either a tablet or hard copy material, reference materials, which they can use with in terms to refer to any of the problems in case they don't know, they don't have an immediate solution to that. So when a farmer comes to the plant clinic, they come with a problem to the plant clinic, and since the plant doctors are equipped, remember these are advisory service providers, they're already, and once we train them, we call them plant doctors, so they are able to diagnose a problem. So essentially, a plant clinic is established in a similar kind of approach to what we see in human health clinics, where if you're not feeling well, you go to a doctor, the doctor examines you and diagnoses the problem that you have and gives you essentially a recommendation in terms of what to do to manage your solution. The only difference in this case is that unlike human clinics where you see humans, here you just see plants, farmers bringing plants to the clinics. So once the farmers come to this structure now, the interaction that happens between the plant doctor and the farmer is recorded and goes into our database. So essentially what goes into the database is what problem did the farmer bring to the clinic? What did the plant doctor diagnose? What was the problem? And what was the recommendation that was given by the plant doctors? So this feeds into the knowledge bank. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is a database. It's an interactive database where it is divided into 2 parts, and the illustration will be on the next slide. But essentially what it is a repository of information where we have a lot of information. We have over 2,500 crop pests in 80 different languages. We have a lot of reference material. That is the one I was saying, like the plant doctor at the plant clinic has access to this material through tablets or even hard copies, because this some of this information on the knowledge bank can be accessed both online, offline, or via other apps. So we have over 14,000 fact sheets and pest management decision guides stored in the knowledge bank, thousands of images that can help you in terms of making a good diagnosis, maps to show the distribution of any particular pest that you're interested in, alerts of any new pests, news of any plant health news that is happening at any particular time. And as I said, it's available both online and offline. And this is a resource that is available to everybody, not only to the plant doctors, but any person who is interested in knowing or diagnosing a new pest or wanting to know more about any existing pests. This is a resource that is open and accessible to everybody. Next slide, please. So this is the knowledge bank. It is divided into two parts. I talked about the interaction that normally a farmer and a plant doctor has at the plant clinic. That information that is coming from the farmer, that interaction with the farmer and the plant doctor goes to a restricted part of the knowledge bank, which we call the Plantwise Online Management System, or POMS. And that is what you see on your left. This part of the knowledge bank is access controlled, and it is access controlled because sometimes farmers can come with new pests to the clinics, and there's that tendency, and we all know that when it comes to reporting of pest cases, and especially new pests, according to the IPPC regulations, that responsibility lies with the respective National Plant Protection Organization. So this is data that is owned by respective governments, and they are the ones that who are our partners now. They're the ones who agree on to in terms of who should have access to this information that is in the knowledge bank on the POMS. But the other section that I was talking about, the open access, this is the one where you have all that reference material, the pest management decision guides, the fact sheets, the distribution maps, all this other section of the knowledge bank on your right is accessible to everybody. And I would encourage you to try. It's interactive. If you don't know the name of the pest, it guides you in terms of, you can type in what symptom you are seeing, what is the crop, on what part of the crop are you seeing the problem. Then it gives you the images and guides you through the process of making a diagnosis of your problem. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just wanted to give you a glimpse of a global glimpse of what we see at the plant clinics. And of course, each of these may vary from country to country, but this is now lumping together these huge data sets that we've collected from the 34 countries that I talked about. So in terms of which crops are most commonly discussed at the clinics, when we looked at all the data lumped up together, wheat turned out to be the biggest, followed by maize, paddy, besom, citrus, in that order. And then next slide, please. Then when we looked at the kinds of problems that we see at the plant clinics, our beautiful small insects, the insect world, is the one that we we saw. Most of the farmers who are coming to the clinics are coming with problems that are related to insect pests. Then followed by fungal infections, followed by weeds, nutrient deficiencies, viruses, bacteria, mites, nematodes, water mold, all those kinds of things that already my predecessors have talked about. So we tend to see them at the clinics. Sometimes the plant doctors are able to, identify and give to the species level, but sometimes it's just generalized as it's a fungus, or it's a bacteria, or it's a nematode, or it's a phytoplasma. So these are the kinds of scenarios that we see when we lump the data we have globally in the clinics. Next slide, please. So when we look at the kinds of recommendations that are commonly made, surprisingly, we see that there are lots of recommendations that are cultural practices, which is good because the Plantwise program encourages, and even in our training modules and the capacity building that we do to the plant doctors, we also have another capacity building activity, which involves training the experts within countries in terms of how to make their own extension material. And even during the materials that we have developed together with the partners and ours, we encourage the use of an IPM approach in pest management. So you will see that this is encouraging to see in the data sets that actually there is a lot of use of cultural practices in addition to pesticides. And of course, it was very interesting for us to note that kind of scenario. Next slide, please. So I would like to take this chance to thank our donors. Plantwise is a program that is funded by many donors, and this includes DFID, DGIS, STC, IFAD, ACIA, Corporate Foundation to some level, UK Space Agency, and Corteva Agri-Sciences. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you, Lorna. This is really great work CABI is doing. We appreciate you taking the time to tell us about it today. Now it's time to launch our next interactive poll. For this poll, we'd like to test how well you've been listening. What is the most common problem seen at CABI's Plantwise clinics? Is it fungus, bacteria, insects, or nutrient deficiency? We'll give everyone a few moments here. All right, and we'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and it looks like the majority of you selected insects as the most common problem. That is correct. Well done. Okay, so our last presentation will focus on the Soybean Innovation Lab's free online course on integrated pest management and pesticide safety. Here today to talk about it is the course developer and SIL's lead extensionist, Nicole Lee. Nikki, feel free to get started whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So as Amy mentioned, my name is Nikki Lee, and today I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about SIL's online IPM and pesticide safety training course. Just to provide a brief overview of the course, so the course is completely free to anyone that's interested in using it. Currently, we have 742 members that are participating in this course and are going through the course materials. And since the course launched in August of 2019, we've awarded 169 certificates. That number is increasing every day. And it's really great to see how many people are interested in working through the course materials and completing the course. The course is currently available in 2 languages, English and Portuguese. And we're always looking for more people to help us translate the course materials into other languages so that we can reach a broader audience. I'll be talking about this a little bit more later on, but we have a large number of current partners and collaborators, including the IITA, the Institute for Agricultural Research in Mozambique, the Church of the Brethren in Nigeria, and Musa Mbeki University in Mozambique. Next slide, please. And to give you an idea of who our learners are, so who is actually taking the course, we have a pretty wide distribution of geographic regions that are represented. About almost half of our learners are from East Africa. We have quite a few that are based in West Africa as well, several in Central Africa and Southern Africa. And then we also have a lot of people that have been taking the course that are based in South Asia, South America, and Europe as well. The affiliations of the different learners are also pretty evenly distributed between government agencies, NGOs, the private sector, and research institutes. And I don't have a pie chart on this, but we also have a number of different occupations represented. So mainly our learners are extension workers, but we also have quite a few that are researchers at universities or research institutions. We have a few farmers, we have a few people that are service providers. So the learners really come from a wide range of backgrounds. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the course is entirely free to learners, but another benefit of the course is that it's self-paced. So we understand that a lot of the learners already have jobs or they're studying, and so the beauty of this course is that you can work through it on your own time. So the course actually takes about 6 hours to complete in total, but you're able to start it whenever you'd like, and you can finish at any point whenever you can. The course is split into several different modules, and at the end of each module, you take a quiz to assess how much you've learned from the module. And after you pass each quiz, as well as the final assessment, you receive a certificate of completion. So you can see on the right here, this is an example of what the certificate of completion that's awarded by SIL actually looks like. And in addition to the certificate of completion, you also have access to a number of different resources. We include links to relevant websites. For example, a lot of CABI materials are provided, different reports that might be relevant to anyone that's interested in learning a bit more about integrated pest management and pesticide safety. Next slide, please. And another wonderful thing about this course is that we also have a lot of opportunities for engagement. So the idea isn't just that learners are going to go through the course, receive their certificate, and be done. There's also an opportunity for members to ask questions on the group discussion board, so they can perhaps pose a problem, or they can just share their experiences. So the idea here is to really create a network of people that are interested in topics around integrated pest management. The course also offers a blog, and you can see a few screenshots from the blog in the figure on the right. And these blogs are written by local and regional experts that give them an opportunity to share their knowledge. And we're always looking for more people to write blog posts. So if there's a topic you're particularly interested in or passionate about, please feel free to reach out to me. But the idea also being that we can highlight current research in Africa around issues with integrated pest management and pesticide safety. And another benefit of this course is that it allows for a few different offshoots. So we're encouraging universities and vocational schools to incorporate the course into their curricula, or even just allow universities to offer this as a means for their students to have access to additional information. Also, we see this course being used as a prerequisite for pesticide application by NGOs, government extension agencies, different companies, etc. Next slide, please. And I'd just like to highlight a few of our current collaborations. We're always looking for more collaborations, so if this is something you're interested in, please feel free to reach out to me. The International Institute for Tropical Agriculture and the Institute for Agricultural Research in Mozambique have both partnered with CIL in order to offer this course in Portuguese, and also to encourage its use in different universities and vocational schools throughout Mozambique. The Peace Corps is currently encouraging its agricultural volunteers to look through the course so that they have a bit more background on integrated pest management and pesticide safety before they go out into the field. CropLife Africa and CropLife International have both provided some really useful information for this course. And finally, Musa Benbiki University is going to start incorporating this online course into their curriculum for students. Next slide, please. So as CIL starts to look towards the future and discuss next steps for this online course, one thing that we're really excited about is the potential to develop partnerships with universities, research institutions, private sector partners that might be interested in using these materials for their own staff or students. And I would also like to announce the establishment of our new Pest and Disease Identification Discussion Board. So as I mentioned, the online course has this really wonderful resource, which is the discussion board. And we would like to encourage learners to submit pictures and descriptions of different weeds, insect pests, and diseases that they haven't been able to identify. So as was mentioned in a few other presentations, the inability to identify pests correctly is a big problem for a lot of people. So we're hoping to help address this by allowing learners to submit photos and then have experts from CIL and other organizations provide information both on the identification of the pest and the management of this pest. So with that, I would like to say thank you for your time, and I'd also like to provide just a very quick demonstration of what the online course actually looks like. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So once you register for the IPM course and you log in, you'll be brought to this page. This is the landing page for the Integrated Pest Management course. And as you scroll down, you can see there's a link to the group discussion board. We have different links for the various blog posts that we have. And then the course material is actually presented down here. So as an example, if you've already worked through the course introduction and now you'd like to move on to the module on integrated pest management and an introduction to that, you can click on the link. And here it will load up the slides. As you click through the slides, you'll also see here on the bottom right, there is a link to accompanying audio. And you can also access the transcripts here that will show you, in case you're unable to listen to the audio, it will show you what the transcript actually is. And then once you work through the course materials, through the module, you can move on to practice questions. So this will give you an idea of what kind of questions will actually be presented on the quiz, and then the quiz is presented here. So you work through the quiz. If you receive at least an 80% on the quiz and on all of the other quizzes, and an 85% on the final assessment here, then you'll receive your certificate of completion. Another feature that's really important in this online course, I understand that connectivity is an issue for a lot of individuals. And so we also have the PowerPoint slides and the audio transcript available for download. So if you have issues with connectivity, you can download these materials, work through them in your own time, and then eventually just go back online and take the quizzes and the final assessments. So Amy, I would like to hand it back over to you. Thank you all very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Nikki, appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and move on. It's time to launch our final poll. So which of the following course editions would you find most helpful? We'll give everyone a few moments. Okay, and we'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, excellent. Thank you everyone for your feedback. We appreciate that. So now we're going to go ahead and dive into all the great questions you've submitted. I hope you all stick around. Dr. Hartman will be the moderator for our Q&A session today. I'm going to go ahead and let him get started so we can try and get as many of your questions answered before we conclude for the day. Glen, I'll go ahead and let you take over.
Okay, so this is the question and answer period, and I would encourage the panelists to keep your answers short so we can get to the many questions that we have. We probably really only have time for 3 or 4 questions, but we may stay longer if people want to stay online to hear more of the questions. Okay, the first one is for Lorna. This is from Lillian Gichuri from Kenya. She's at AGRA, and she would like to know who can become a plant doctor. Is it only limited to government extension officers? Can they become self-employed?
Thank you, Yuchi, for your question. That's really a tough one, but I'll answer it to the best of my knowledge. As I explained, the use of the term a plant doctor is based on those extension officers that we further trained on the module 1 and 2. So they are the ones that we normally refer to as a plant doctor. Over the years, we've had requests for these trainings from various stakeholders. We've trained even people like from CAFIs, we've trained people from FFS, we've trained people from various private organizations, but we don't necessarily call them plant doctors, but they are trained based on how they value the course. But they don't, and for you to be a plant doctor, of course, after undergoing that training, you must run a plant clinic. And the plant clinic is also associated with the collection of this data that I was talking about, that interaction that you have, which then enters into our database. So the others, yes, they are trained, but they don't necessarily take up the term, that title of a plant doctor. I don't know.
Thank you, Lorna.
Adequate enough?
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, the next question is from Christoph Bracker from Zambia. He's with Good Nature Agro, and this is for Michelle. Are the issues observed with seed in the different countries due to management, or is there a geographical significance in these percentages? And he was specifically interested, I think, in the fusarium in Zambia.
Oh, sure, yeah. I would say depending, so a lot of the storage molds are going to be based off of how this stuff is stored, but some of the more in-field pathogens like the fusarium is going to be location specific. So like Glenn was talking about in the beginning, that the disease triangle. So fusarium likes moist conditions. So areas that have a lot more rainfall or irrigation might be more susceptible to fusarium, where a drier, I didn't talk about microfermina or charcoal rot, but a drier area, you'll see more charcoal rot on these seeds. So yeah, location is really important for a lot of this too, but as management, it is pretty multifaceted.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Yep.
Okay, the next question is from Nicole Ernest from Cameroon, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. And I think this could go to Nikki or to Michelle. Maybe Nikki, you can take the first stab at it. Can we use fungicides to prevent seed diseases?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So I'd also like Michelle to interject as well, since she is the seed expert. But from my understanding, there are a lot of seed treatments that you can use, fungicidal seed treatments that can help prevent a lot of these diseases from emerging. Michelle, would you like to take over?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So maybe more of, if you're treating these seeds, if it's going to be like a seedling damping off case, if you have that treatment on it, that's going to be killing that pathogen, so it's not growing and overcoming that plant. Actually keeping it from getting into the seed, I am unsure about that. There might be in-season ones, but I'm not familiar. But seed treatment could definitely help alleviate some of that pressure.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Abdul Latif from Mozambique, from the Bayer Crop Sciences, and he was asking Harun, what are the most problematic diseases in Southern Africa? Is there any recommended variety? Is there any seed improvement taking place to overcome these diseases?
Right, thank you for that question, and apologies for the internet problem I had when I was doing my presentation. And so the most important diseases or problems we found in Southern Africa is soybean rust and red leaf blotch. And like I mentioned in my presentation, we do not have resistant varieties that are already available, because with I think using of resistant varieties is the best approach that a farmer can have. But we do have some of the fungicides that are being used elsewhere, for example, against soybean rust in Brazil and elsewhere. So some of those are available and they can be used. We hope that through the Pan-African variety trials, we might identify some of the genotypes that could be resistant, and then they can be fast-tracked for release for use by the farmers.
Okay, thank you, Harun. I think really that's all the time we have for questions for today. If we haven't answered your question, we're going to get back to those people who wrote in and respond by email after the webinar. So if you have other questions, I think you can still probably add them, and we're willing to respond to any questions we have. And I'd really like to thank the organizers for putting this together, and I'll send it back to Amy.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Also, big thank you to all of our panelists, Harun, Lorna, Michelle, and Nikki, for taking the time to be with us here today. I'd also like to thank all of our great attendees today for your interaction and your feedback. This concludes the Soybean Disease in the Tropics, a Management Toolkit webinar. Thank you so much for your participation. Today's webinar has been recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you in a follow-up email. When you exit the webinar today, you'll be asked to complete a short exit survey. We really appreciate all of your feedback and the time you spent with us, so please take just a few moments to complete that survey. We rely heavily on these surveys to learn how to improve our webinars and also to find out what content you're interested in for future events. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day or evening. Stay safe and healthy out there.